Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Jason.
Hello, everyone.
And Miranda.
Good afternoon.
Again, at least for the time being. I like our regular third host we got now with Miranda.
I'd say it's going to be different when eventually Stoney does come back. I mean,
it is. I'm getting comfortable with this kind of setup, and then we're going to get
unless Miranda chooses to be the fourth permanent host. But
well, I think we'll see Sony soon. I think that he's going stir crazy being at home. So.
I bet.
Oh, he
likes being active.
He wants to be behind the mic. I know what Stoney wants to do.
That's so crazy.
Now Miranda would like, give me a break. I don't have to do this every week. You know,
right.
It's, it is hard. I mean, you think about this, coming up with a topic and every week, it can be difficult after a while to figure something out that is interesting, that it's engaging, and people would want to listen to.
Right.
So it's.
And giving the topic good service, because it's easy just to kind of fluff over things, but to put some thought into some effort into researching it, so you can provide, an unbiased opinion over what's going on. It does involve some time and effort.
We have a doozy today to talk about.
Uh-oh. Go ahead now.
Yeah, well, we're talking about cloning. And when we were talking about topics, we brought this up. I really had no idea of what we were getting ourselves into to try to talk about this, because the material is very dense. There's a lot of stuff out there on cloning, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm a bit intimidated by it, because it's just not something I know a lot about. It's very heavy into science, and it's usually not the kind of stuff that I would normally kind of have an interest in per se, but
it's in the news quite a bit lately.
It is.
That's what put it on our radar, and hopefully it put it on our listeners' radar as well.
Yep.
Now, let me just say this, because not everybody will understand or knows too much about cloning. This might be your first introduction to it. So,
I'm not going to lie either. When I did research on this, what I think they're referring to as cloning is that's not what I think of when I put.
Well, I'm just going to give the definition for our listeners in case this is a brand new topic for them and they're listening and they're trying to, pick up what we're laying down here. Cloning refers to a variety of different processes which result in producing genetically identical copies of a biological entity. So, there's a whole bunch of different examples of that in nature. Some bacteria clone themselves. We've got, there's a certain species of cricket or grasshopper that clones itself. Mushrooms clone themselves. And identical twins are essentially clones, because one egg split into two genetically identical individuals. But for our purposes here, we're talking about gene cloning and research into cloning, and there's so many different things that go along with that, because, as always, you have to follow the money trail, because that's what dictates how technology gets used. And right now, the biggest direction that cloning is taking is obviously in animal cloning, with a nod to future human cloning. And so there's a lot to unbundle there with the ethics and politics and, again, money and everything else in between that comes part and parcel with the whole cloning debate. So let's dive in, guys.
Well, as I normally do, I have some statistics.
We would not expect anything less.
I have some a Gallup poll that I found. Now, this is dated 2018. I couldn't find anything sooner. But according to, at this time, 40% of Americans are now saying that the cloning of animals is morally acceptable. And that's up from 32% the year before. So there appears to be a kind of a softening on this issue. And now, with a caveat, a lot of things are in that because a lot of that is split by religion, ideology, and gender on this issue.
And education levels.
And education levels. But 16% in the U.S. say cloning humans is morally acceptable. It's not very high.
No.
So there's still a lot of hesitation on the idea of cloning humans because, I mean, that kind of opens up a big can of worms. I mean, is that clone person equal to the person that they derive the, your DNA from? I mean, I don't know if you clone, if Jason is cloned, is the clone copy of Jason as,
is he Jason 2.0?
Yeah,
or is it a whole new entity with their own soul and their own
right? I mean, there's a whole host of things that go along with that. I've kind of always felt that the technology eventually, because I mean, as of right now, the science on cloning humans is very poor. There's not a lot of success with it, and it's just, I think it's the complexity of our DNA, which makes it very difficult to clone humans.
Well, let's interject for a quick second in how cloning works. And there's a bunch of different ways to clone, but in general, in animals, a mature somatic cell, like a skin cell, from an adult animal that they wish to copy, is transferred to a similar species egg where the DNA was removed from the egg. And so when they put those skin cell DNA parts into the egg, it creates a situation where they run an electrical current through it to stimulate the cells turning over, and that creates, hopefully, a viable embryo. But like Jason said, that is not very good. It's not very accurate. It's not very efficient. Right now, a lot of people will remember Dolly, the sheep that was created.
Dolly.
That was 25, 26 years ago now. It's been a while. We haven't really progressed a whole lot. Dolly was the sole successful embryo that was created out of 277 tries.
Yeah.
So just to demonstrate how inefficient this is, you have to have a lot of experiments before you get one success. And, it was, and cloning is not a new thing. Back in 1979, researchers produced the first genetically identical mice by splitting embryos in the womb. And splitting embryos continues to be one of the ways that things are cloned. But to clone things off of animal or adult cells it's a whole other level altogether. And that has been one of the problems, is that it is just so horribly inefficient. Now, Japanese researchers, they have cloned calves. I think 2 years in the early 80s, they started cloning cows. And other cloned animals that we have been successful thus far have been cats, dogs, horses, deer, mules, ox, rabbits, and cows. Like right now, the big one in China is cows. They are cloning high-quality cattle to satisfy the demand for excess milk and excess meat production, where they want the bougie cows. If they can clone high-end cow embryos and put them into cheap or low-end cows, then they're able to quickly grow something that makes them a lot more money. And in fact, there is a man, there's a Netflix TV show about him right now, actually, and it's called The King of Clones, and it's on Hwang Woo-suk. And he was a scientific pioneer who cloned dogs and claimed to clone people, but that was all found to be BS. And he was charged with embezzlement and bioethical law violations. but he's still around. He's still kicking, and he works with the Chinese. And they claim that they're producing 1 million cattle embryos every year to meet the Chinese demand.
Jeez.
Why do the Chinese always seem to have this demand for these kind of things?
Because I think they have a huge population, I think.
It's the ancient Chinese secret: buy low, sell high.
Well, I mean, I have a bunch of stuff here, and I've got an actual timeline here that I found that was put out by CNN, and this is an article I saw. Looked like it was published August 1st of 2022. The 3 types of cloning: there's reproductive cloning, therapeutic cloning, and gene cloning. And I just kind of want to go over this timeline that I found. It's pretty good of kind of the history of cloning. But in 1952, scientists demonstrate they can remove the nucleus from a frog's egg, replace it with the nucleus of an embryonic frog cell, and get the egg to develop into a tadpole. So, I mean, this goes back to the 50s. In 1963, Chinese scientists reportedly create the first cloned fish by transferring the DNA from a male carp into the egg of a female carp. In 1984, a researcher in Britain claims that he has cloned the first mammal, a lamb that was produced via the nuclear transfer of sheep embryo cells. On February 22nd, 1997, scientists revealed Dolly the sheep, even though she was actually done in 1996. In 1998, more than 50 mice are reportedly cloned from a single mouse over several generations. Separately, 8 calves are reportedly cloned from a cow. In 2000, pigs and a goat are reportedly cloned from adult cells. 2001, Advanced Cell Technology of Worcester, Massachusetts, says it produced 6-cell cloned human embryo in research aimed at harvesting stem cells. Separately, 5 bulls are cloned from a champion show cattle named Full Flush. In 2002, rabbits and a kitten are reportedly cloned from adult cells. On December 27, 2002, CloneAid claims to produce the first human clone, a baby girl by the name of Eve. The company declines to provide proof that Eve is a clone or even that she exists.
That's weird.
Yes, it is weird. January 23rd, 2003, CloneAid claims to have cloned the first baby boy. The baby was allegedly cloned from tissue taken from the Japanese couple's comatose 2-year-old boy.
Wow.
Who was killed in an accident in 2001. CloneAid again declined to provide physical evidence of the cloning. In 2003, the Roslin Institute confirms that Dolly, the first cloned mammal, was euthanized after being diagnosed with progressive lung disease. She was 6 years old. Which is also, my understanding, has been a problem with the cloning process. Is the long-term health is generally not very good.
I've got information on that.
I'd like to hear that because that's very interesting.
Yep.
In 2003, scientists at the University of Idaho said they have cloned a mule, naming it Idaho Jim. 2 additional mules are cloned at the same year as part of a joint project between the University of Idaho and Utah State University. And all the way to March 17th of 2021, scientists announced in the journal Nature they have generated a model of an early human embryo called blastoids by reprogramming skin cells. That may be what you were brought up early. Didn't you mention about skin cells?
Well, skin cells is how they have determined, like that's how they've been getting the cells to do a lot of this cloning with. You can clone with sexual tissue. The sperm cells and the ovum which is probably what they're going to do when they clone like the woolly mammoth and some of these Pleistocene
To me,
type
that's
of...
exciting. That is what I'm hoping to see.
I think
where
we'll see,
this
I think we'll
technology,
see that first.
I'd love to see
Yeah.
them bring back the woolly mammoth. Now, some purist out there would say, well, now you're interfering with the divine order of things, and there's a reason they went extinct. And I think they went extinct because of external issues, not because in itself the species just decided to die out.
Well, Japanese researchers last year did bring back an Arctic wolf. They used a
created
surrogate.
it.
Yep. Because you have to remember, there's all sorts of genetic material, like really primo genetic material in the Russian tundra. You know, when you go out to those Russian steppes, that's frozen. It's uncovered every year. Well, they'll find whole woolly mammoths. They'll find whole woolly rhinoceroses. They'll find parts of woolly bison. They'll find, like cave bears and all these kind of animals from the last ice age, and they're impeccably frozen. And in fact, they have found some that were so well frozen that they have eaten the meat. But, not that... that's kind of like a novelty that some of the scientists do now. But in the past, when Russians have been hungry, they go out in the steppes and look for, these frozen caches of animals that died. So when they recover these highly preserved animals, they have a source of not just skin cells, but of the sexual tissue, which are things that would typically rot very quickly and wouldn't be recoverable. And it's not something that is saved. Like if we go into museum specimens, if you go and grab a dodo bird off the shelf somewhere, it's not going to have the sexual organs intact because they just they hollowed it out and they put it on a bird form, and you just have the exterior portion of the organism. But with these, what these Japanese scientists did was they took a beagle and they used the beagle's egg, and they took all the DNA out of it, and they used the Arctic wolf, and they have been able to create an Arctic wolf. And that's, 8,000, 9,000-year-old species. So it has begun. Jurassic Park is on its way.
Well, you speaking of like cloning animals, I on this timeline, there's a lot of dates here. I didn't want to go through all of them, but I thought this was interesting. In 2008, 2009, 5 cloned puppies from Tracker, a German Shepherd, September 11 Ground Zero rescue dog, are born. So
That's pretty cool.
They cloned the dogs. They cloned that dog and created 5 others. So.
And that will be, and I think it probably is, a big moneymaker for cloning, because there's always going to be, cloning is going to appeal to people with money because you can recreate your favorite pet. You can, you can bring them back, so to speak. And so, and in Korea, there's whole companies, and that's what they focus on is cloning people's Afghan hounds and their childhood dog or their childhood cat. And that's what they're doing. But that is not technology that is available to the everyday Joe. So again, this is a technology that's gonna be for the haves, not the have-nots. Where else could the technology come into play? I think that we're gonna see, like what Jason mentioned, people growing organs.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a.
If you need a new kidney, it's a lot easier to grow one in a lab than it is to try to find a match. And then you don't have to worry about rejection drugs and all this other kind of stuff.
Right, because it's you.
But are they going to grow? What if you have a brain injury? Are they going to grow you a new brain, a whole new body, and just take the brain out? Or
well,
there was
that movie called The Island? I believe was that was the theme of that movie was, these people are like in this facility, and they get like a lottery drawing and they're going to the island. It's like, oh, they've made it, and they don't realize that they're like in an underground lab. The world is going on around them, and the rich of the world have paid to be clone of themselves. So when their organs need replacing, in essence, the people that get picked to go to the island, and they think they're going to this beautiful place. They're actually getting their organs harvested.
That's pretty horrific.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of leads to the ideas. If you do clone humans, I mean, are these people?
Are they
equal?
people?
Are they
equal?
people?
Yeah.
Do they deserve this? Do they deserve the same dignity? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I'd feel about that. I mean, it's like you're not.
It's a more compelling argument, I feel like, to question if AI is that can say all the right things. I think it's a more compelling argument to ask: do they have the right to like exist as people, as opposed to like if you clone a human being and then ask the question if they deserve to be a human. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if let's say for instance you clone a human and it grows up to be an average human and it like functions the same way, but it just may have some like developmental issues in the future. Like it's the same. I think.
Well, we can expect to see that, and that's something that, Jason and I both kind of touched on with what we've mentioned so far, is there are a lot of problems with these genetic clones.
Right.
But, think about it another way. What if you've got a military? They could clone, a whole bunch of guys that look like The Rock.
Right.
These great big, beasts of men that are super soldiers. Where is the like? Are they going to be even treated as people? Are they treated as slaves? Are they treated as property of the U.S. government? How does that come into play?
I'm a firm believer that I think there's dangers in the science of cloning. I think it does open a lot of doors that I don't know if we've got we're not sophisticated enough to kind of deal with that yet. But I believe that the idea of growing organs, to me, is well within reach. And the idea that as every baby is born, if the parents would want to do that, genetic material will be taken from the baby to grow replacement organs, and those organs would be in essence go into an organ account. So as the person ages, if something's wrong with them, they would have something to replace that, and theoretically you'd extend life expectancy a long time. I mean,
potentially.
Yeah, I mean, if
we still seem to come up against that 120-year wall, and what did you guys call that episode? The
Great Filter.
The Great Filter. That's one of the great filters.
I mean, the 120 years. I mean, that's. I mean, now you deal with cell degradation as time goes on, but if somehow you can stop that and replace organs as they go bad, then theoretically you can keep going. I mean, you bad heart, okay, put a new one in. Bad lungs, put new ones in. Bad kidneys, bad liver, whatever. Boom.
That's how Keith Richards is doing it.
Keith Richards. Miranda.
Hey, tell me I'm wrong. He just keeps going and going.
Well, some people have good genetics. Yeah. I mean, I tell you what, I've got I look at people that just miraculously can just look good even though, there's a gentleman that goes to my church, and he's like 95 years old, and he walks around, he recently lost his wife, and he's remarried to a much younger woman now.
I'm sure his children are very enthusiastic about that.
And nicest guy. I mean, he really is. I enjoy talking with him, but, I could tell, he's very much at his age aware, interacts, and moves around. His body's a bit frail, but, at 95 years old, who ain't frail at those ages? But, he gets up and walks on his own. He doesn't need a walker, doesn't need a cane or nothing. He walks, does his own thing, and it's
you
like
see other people.
That's
that are
what
95,
I want to be when I'm at 95 years old.
And they look like the Crypt Keeper.
It's like what's your secret of keeping? Because I played a lot of tennis and keep my mind sharp. But other than that, sometimes it's just luck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right.
sometimes it's luck.
Yeah. What that brings to mind, something interesting that I read about a lot of this cloning stuff, is that these cloned animals tend to be a very sickly bunch. And let's use Dolly as a good example. Dolly, they took material from a 6-year-old sheep to make Dolly. And so the telomeres, the part of the DNA that they used, was 6 years old. So it had already aged out half of the lifespan of what a normal sheep is, because they normally live about 12 years. And so by the time Dolly hit 6, when they had to put her to sleep, she was at the end, even though she was only at half the lifespan of a sheep, she was at the end of her lifespan because she had already, her DNA started off 6 years into it. So when we're looking at people that think, oh, I'm going to clone, it's like, let's say somebody is 60 years old and they lose their 20-year-old child and they're like, oh, I'm going to clone my son because I loved him so much. Well, that clone is going to be starting off with DNA that's 20 years old.
Right.
So, you give, let's say, 18 years for that clone to grow up. They're going to be 40.
Or they're gonna look 20 but feel 40.
They're genetically, they'll have all the health
right.
problems of
Exactly.
somebody much older. And that was, that's been one of these things. And we even see that in this day and age with people that get fertility treatments. It's like fertility treatments are associated with more health problems with the kids, greater incidence of ADHD, greater incidence of autism. And there are some studies that come out and say, no, that's not true. But you talk to parents that have these kids and they're like, yeah, we did fertility drugs. Yeah, we did IVF. Yeah, we did. And, and I can say I did fertility meds to get Magnus. And, he is my child that has the issues. The other two, not so much. And friends of mine that I know that have gone the whole IVF route, it's really a roll of the dice, and I don't think a lot of people realize that when we're messing with Mother Nature, that it adds an extra level of what could go wrong into the mix.
Well, I've got some 10 advantages and disadvantages of cloning animals. And now this article is from actually 2017, so it's a bit dated, but I imagine the
spirit will be the same.
Yeah, I mean it's still relevant. And these are advantages. Science could help to restore balance to planetary ecosystems. If an animal goes extinct or leaves because the ecosystem does not support them anymore, the effects on the local area can be quite dramatic. Talking about like wolves and stuff like that. So it would help that, reintroducing animals. It would improve our food chain supplies, number 2. The United Nations estimates that more than 10 billion people will populate the planet by the year 2050.
Yikes.
In 2150, that figure could double to 20 billion people. The taxation on planetary food supplies would be immense. I can't even imagine 20 billion people. All through animal cloning, we could add more animal protein to the food chain, eliminating some of the pressure will undoubtedly be placed on croplands in future generations.
Well, and that's kind of happened. Remember when we were all doing our episode on the Titan?
Yeah.
And and when it imploded?
Yep.
That same week, when we were all distracted on this Titan news, they pushed through, allowed that Bill Gates artificially grown meat, which that's clone meat.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. I'm eating clone meat.
And it does not legally have to be labeled. So your store can be selling you, cloned meat, it does not have to be labeled, which that's frightening to me.
Well, yeah, I think that's a biggie. I think the food issue is going to be huge. There could be research benefits. Animal cloning doesn't have to involve the entire animal, certain organs we touched on. It could ease grief. Losing a cat or dog hurts, because you're treated as members of our family. We can clone our pets. And identical DNA does not necessarily mean an identical animal. People will believe what they want to believe about animal cloning. John Wostendijk, who wrote the book Dog Incorporated, The Uncanny Inside Story of Cloning Man's Best Friend, told IO9 in 2012 of a man who believed the soul of his dog found its way into its clone. As we saw with Dolly the sheep, however, an identical animal through nuclear DNA does not mean the animal is a complete indistinguishable clone.
No.
So it's not going to be the same exact thing.
Well, it's the same thing with talking about cloning a human. It's like at that point, like you clone yourself, you're not going to have all your memories, all your experiences. Like that's not how that is going to work.
Well,
like,
you might not even look the same because when it comes to your DNA, all of your genes aren't turned on. They're not all activated. So you've got your genotype and you have your phenotype. And, one is what your genetic expression actually is, and the other one is how you look. So it's just like you can have a bunch of cats that are identical, and every single one is a different color. But genetically, they're all the same.
Right.
And, and you'll often see with identical twins, they look identical as babies, but as time goes on, you can see these subtle differences between them, and it's because certain genes have been activated and certain genes have been turned off throughout their lifetime. So what happens with these clones is you create a clone of your childhood, your dog that you loved, and it's not the same. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't act the same because it doesn't have, it's missing all the life experiences that made it that dog that you love so much.
Right.
It's just you're copying the shell, but you're not getting all the good stuff
essence.
in. Yeah.
And that's why like this is very reminiscent of AI, like the conversation we had where the only thing I have to ask is why. In that aspect, like I get the idea of cloning organs, I get the idea of like potentially cloning species that have been extinct to help like repopulate them or like push them into an area. But then when you start talking about like cloning your children or cloning pets,
Well,
at that
parents
point,
are desperate. If you lose a child, you're going to be desperate.
You're right, and I get that, but again, it's not going to be. It's like you said. It's like
It's a shell.
Just because the cells are all lined up the same way and it may look and feel the same way, it's not going to be. You can't do that. That's not how life works.
I'm going to bring up something I've brought up to you before. Watch the movie AI. It touches on that a little bit.
Will do. But that's what I'm saying. It's like at that point, I mean, like just because, like again, but that's the question that I have is like again, if you want to, like if your dog passes away, it is sad. Mourn for the loss of your pet, and then if you need to, go buy a new pet.
Right.
It's like there's like a natural cycle of things, and I feel like that's where I start to I feel uncomfortable about all this. Of like, I can understand that we're moving society forward. We're trying new things. We're doing stuff, but there's a certain point where I'm like, makes it feel uncomfortable.
Think about not just your friendly little fluffy kitten or puppy. Look at some like these famous animals like Secretariat. If they could take some skin cells from Secretariat, because that there's going to be some sticking around in a test tube somewhere.
Right.
And they can recreate the most winning horse, in history.
Right.
Because already as it is, those horses, when they're put up to stud, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So people make millions of dollars off of stud fees. So if you can create a series of new Secretariats, and you're making
a line of super horses,
millions of dollars. You could completely change the horse racing industry within a few short years.
Right.
Well, and there's a lot of money in certain industries.
You're right, but that's again, besides money, why? Like that's the only thing.
But money drives everything.
I get it, but again,
well, I think though, Ian, there are a lot of people that there's some people that really don't have a healthy appreciation for that life comes to an end.
I know.
It does. I
get
think there are people that are so at loss when they lose a child, especially people who lose children, because the natural order of thing ain't for the child to die first. It's just not. And so if you're not, I could see people that are just not, that don't have a good kind of understanding of that and realize that, things happen. I could see if this technology was at a level where you could clone humans. say we could with 95% accuracy rate that we can clone my child that just got lost, I guarantee you people would do it.
Oh, I'm not saying you're wrong, but what I'm saying is, like, again, let's say it's a sci-fi application of it. Of like, if I want to clone myself, I could clone a perfect version of myself down to the letter, like every fiber of my being at the same age that I am and everything. Like, it's still not going to have my memories and experience. That's something that I don't feel like is quite possibly something you can clone. There may be some sort of science behind it, but I really don't think that you could down to the memories, the experience, everything that I've been through my life. You could clone that out of me.
I don't think the scientists are worried about that.
Oh, you're right, but what I'm talking about is let's say hypothetically, you can clone somebody. Myself, like, let's say like I pass away, my mother wants to clone me. There are some things that I've been through with my mother that this clone of me will not have been through, and it will not feel the same, and it will not be the same. And at that point, then it's like, why try to do that? And I get it.
But that's probably such a small percentage of the cloning applications.
Right.
Like we're going to see food, we're going to see animals, we're going to see a clone zoo. You know, we are going to see a Jurassic Park type of situation, whether it's dinosaurs or whether it's all these Paleolithic creatures or animals that are now extinct. Like, there'll probably be touring extinction zoos.
I think as far as the woolly mammoth, I think the closest relative to the woolly mammoth is the East Asian elephant. So they have already implanted what they have found into some East Asian elephants and have given birth to, in essence, would be a woolly mammoth. I'm sure that will take some time to develop a line. And then once again, you're dealing with the health of the animal. Is it...
Well, and that's health has been an issue because the stem cells that are used for cloning they're most akin to cancer cells, and so stem cells have a very much an affinity for becoming cancerous, and so a lot of these cloned animals end up succumbing to cancers, and a lot of these cloned tissues end up growing tumors. So this is. And this is the double-edged sword. This is the nefarious thing that we've got coming down the pipeline.
And this is what upsets me about you, like, talking about, like, cloning a perfect race of horse for money. Like, I get that. But then at that point, you're like, we're going to have an entire species of horse that is just going to be cancerous and, like, lives probably a very short life. So I get when I say why, like, I get that there's, like, money drives everything, but then when you think of, like, a morality spectrum, like a much bigger thing of, like, we are cloning animals.
But we already have it, like Great Danes. The average Great Dane lives 5 years.
Right.
You know, and but people keep breeding them, people keep buying them, people keep loving their Great Danes.
Right.
But, you know, as a dog lover, I wouldn't want to get a dog that is, 70%, 80% chance it's going to die by the time it's 5, because it's just like they're just becoming a good dog by the time they're 5. Like, and it's like the bigger the breed of dog, they tend to have more health problems. I used to show and breed bull mastiffs. About 50% of them, if they made it past 7, you had a good chance of them making it to 12, but over 50% of them died when they were 7. That was kind of the bad year, and that's when they would get cancers, and that's when they would, have hip issues and like all these other kind of mast cell tumors and things. People have been doing that with dogs.
Yeah, you're right. And that doesn't make it any better.
It doesn't make it any better, but that's what it is.
That's why I think it's. I want to say it's somewhere in the. I want to say it's like Switzerland or something. They don't allow, or Sweden, they don't allow pugs because of how awful of a lifespan they have and how it's kind of torturous that, like, they live an entire life that is not pleasant at all. And it's like,
there's very few modern breeds that look the way their ancestors did.
Right.
We have messed with their genetics and their genes to such a great extent. Like, you look at a bulldog from 1850 to a bulldog now.
Totally two different
things. And it's just like now there's several breeds that can only be bred artificially because they're not physically capable of having sex, and they have to have C-sections. So nature would have bred that out, but we're perpetuating it because of
Right.
our we
'Cause of
like
money.
we like these little
Right, right.
brachycephalic breeds that have the little smooshed in faces, and we love that, so we keep perpetuating it. I think that the cloning stuff, and we haven't even talked about the whole pharmaceutical angle, because that's probably going to be the biggest moneymaker for all this cloning.
Of course
is
it
the
is.
pharmaceutical angle. But I think that what we're going to see is, to make it palatable to people, is we're going to see the zoos, the Jurassic Park type of thing. We're going to see, oh, we've recreated the Tasmanian devil. We've recreated the dodo bird. There's all these extinct animals. Because can you imagine the National Geographic specials on reintroducing the woolly mammoth to the Russian steppes and to Alaska?
Yeah, I would love to see the woolly mammoth come back. I don't know why.
We'll
I'm
see
fascinated
it. I think
with,
that'll probably be one of the
I
easier
just
ones
think
for them
it's
to
a
do.
shame. I hate to see animals go extinct, but I know that's just the way nature works. I mean, that's a topic unto itself. What caused the woolly mammoth to all the megafauna to go extinct when it did about 12,000 years ago. But yeah, it's interesting. But I had the disadvantages. Just real quick, I want to mention, of course, and we've kind of touched on 95% of cloning attempts fail. Cloning is the least reliable form of reproduction. In bovines, a condition called large offspring syndrome occurs in about 6% of the time. It is a condition that is usually fatal to the calf and can affect the mother as well. For bovines that are bred through reproductive cloning, this syndrome has occurred in over half the total cloning attempts. 1 in 4 bovine clones will also experience a condition called hydrops, which causes the animal to swell with retained fluid. Another drawback is the diversity loss. Eventually changes the species anyway. It's basically a genetic bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
Cheetahs, for example, share 99% of their genetics with other members of their species. In reproductive cloning, however, it would become 100%. To eliminate diversity loss, a similar species would need to be introduced to a genetic pool that would change the future course of the animal. There's also a potential of a slippery slope. We all remember Star Trek, right? 1960s. One of their fictional historical accounts of Earth's past include the genetics war. I remember them talking about this in watching Star Trek in the 90s, that involved cloning and genetic manipulation. So it creates a bunch of ethical, spiritual, and scientific implications of such science. Creates a slippery slope. Would clone humans be held in higher regard and lower regard? Would they attempt to take over the world and rule it like it did in the Star Trek episode? And alas, it isn't cheap. According to Vegan Pets, the cost to produce a genetic twin to a cat is currently $25,000. The cost to clone a dog is at $50,000. The exact cost of cloning Dolly the sheep has never been publicly released, but it is estimated to have cost nearly $1 million. Grace Links reports the cost to clone a cow at $20,000. A company in Texas sells cloned horses for up to $150,000 per animal. So, once again, you talked about money. That's not $150,000 a horse.
Well, you've heard of Henrietta Lacks. You've seen the movie about her.
I don't think when.
It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And she was an African-American woman who died in 1951, I think, of cervical cancer. The doctors at Baltimore, at the hospital in Baltimore, they went and they cut out part of her cervix, and they harvested a bunch of cancer cells without her consent. And they have used those cancer cells are called the HeLa, capital H-E, capital L-A. And that is the first immortalized cancer line. And those cancer cells are sold to labs around the country, around the world to this day. They were, like I said, they were taken in 1951. And her family didn't even know that they had taken that genetic material from her until researchers reached out to her children in 1973 asking for blood samples. The company that continues to sell her cells makes $35 billion a year.
How much?
$35 billion.
Billion.
Billion. There is money in cloned material. And this is going to be, this is where the real money lies, is in the genetic material that they're going to be cloning for labs. There was another one I found. Let me find it here. It was quite interesting. There was a series of miniature pigs that were created, and I'm just trying to find my notes on that carry a gene that people that develop premature Alzheimer's have. And so they're quickly putting as much research as they can into these pigs, because then they can use that for funding all sorts of future Alzheimer's research. So it's like all of these gene lines that they're putting together, if they can just keep the cells going and going and going, and they've essentially created immortal cell lines, it's a money machine. They're printing money. It's like literally printing money. There's going to be labs that happily charge $50,000 to replace your dog, or $100,000 to replace your horse. But the big money is in these pharmaceutical lines. If just one company is making $35 billion a year from one genetic line, think of what all the other ones are doing.
Gee, $35 billion. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's scary. It's absolutely scary.
You say follow the money.
Yeah.
Didn't you say that the FDA approved the sale of animal products from cloned animals?
They approved the selling of cloned meat.
Okay.
And that happened just a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Cloning, it was first coined by an Englishman named John Haldane in a speech given in 1963. So, and another fact here I found pretty interesting because I like them. Navel oranges are technically clones. These seedless oranges presented farmers with a unique obstacle because without seeds, it's hard to commercially grow food products. Farmers graft budding oranges to other blossoming trees in order to create more navel oranges. As a result, all navel oranges originate from the same tree in Brazil.
Wow.
Interesting. And I think bananas are genetically all the same too right now, because I think all the different strains of bananas have been kind of killed off by different banana blights. And so we're down to one strain of bananas. The pig thing, I found it. Researchers at Our House University, Department of Medicine, Biomedicine, they harnessed CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to generate the Gottingen mini pigs that were born with mutations in the SORL1 gene, and that is what they figure is going to be the next big factor that influences Alzheimer's research, and it all comes from cloning.
Wow.
I think there's a lot of medical potential advances as a result of cloning. I just think that we're so torn on this subject, and people are afraid of kind of going down that rabbit hole. But I do believe that there are a lot of potential medical advances with cloning. I really do, and I do hope that that we do and use the science correctly.
And that will be the hard thing. I think there's a consortium of 40 countries, including Canada, Mexico, Australia, the UK, France. The United States was not on the list, that have formally banned human cloning.
Yeah.
But these other countries are not. They're a little bit more loosey-goosey with the animal stuff. So I think that's going to open up the floodgates. And whenever you have people doing stuff legally, there's always a subset of people doing it illegally. And
of course. Yeah.
That's where we'll see I think, some more nefarious applications.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got here. It said I did a search on laws and regulations on cloning, and I as of September of 2021, the United States, there is no federal law that specifically bans human cloning, but there have been legislative efforts to prohibit it. However, federal funds cannot be used for human cloning research. Several states have passed their own laws regarding cloning, with some banning both reproductive and therapeutic cloning, while others ban only, reproductive cloning. In the European Union has a range of regulations on cloning. In 1997, the EU adopted a policy to prohibit the patenting of human clones and their commercial use. In 2001 and 2004, the EU issued directives to prohibit reproductive cloning and the use of cloned human embryos for research purposes. The United Nations Declaration on Human Cloning was adopted in 2005, calling for member states to adopt measures to prohibit all forms of human cloning. And then different countries have enacted various laws and regulations on cloning. Some allow therapeutic cloning for research purposes, while others have outright bans.
Well, where do you draw the line? And that's where the ethics comes into play. Because, there are states right now where if you're trying to get IVF, in vitro fertilization, they can't do it in certain states because they can't create an embryo in a test tube and then put that embryo and put that in the mother, because that falls under the cloning guidelines. Other places, that's just fine. They have to do it before the embryo gets, so many cell divisions. But it's like, where do you draw the line on, okay, well, we'll create human embryos, but we'll stop them when they've had 6 splits? Or do we stop them when they have 32 splits? Or do we wait until they look like a little, they're a little zygote? Like, where do you draw the line in the sand on, okay, well, we'll allow IVF, but we're not going to allow this, or we're not going to, we'll allow them to create life to help infertile people, but we're not going to allow them to create cells to use for stem cell research. There's a lot of ethics involved. And then where you fall into the argument on what if you're pro-life, that's going to that's going to be called into action here too, because what happens to the embryos you don't use? Or what happens to all the embryos that fail?
I think I read somewhere where the problem with trying to create human clones is the spindle proteins, if I remember. Miranda, you're more of a science background than we are. Is that, do you?
I haven't read anything about that.
I think they say because where the spindle protein sits within the nucleus versus other animals where I think when I read it's spaced out further so they can pull what they need to pull out without damaging that, versus humans where it's so close, it's almost impossible to do that because of just where everything sits. So I didn't know if you saw anything on that.
The only thing I looked at that I saw was that it would be relatively easy for them to divide embryos. So, to make your singleton pregnancy into a double, to make it a twin pregnancy, because that would be very easy for them to split that. And they have the technology to split that. It's the technology that comes into place from using adult cells and trying to create clones. We're not there yet. We're probably not that far off, but it's just it's too expensive and it's not accurate.
Well, CloneAid, that company I mentioned, it started in the United States, but they shifted offshore. I think they're in the Bahamas now.
Yeah,
because they can't do what they want to do here.
But see, I wonder if some of those corporations are just kind of like shell corporations, or that they're just scam, because like CloneAid, for example, has never proved, they've claimed that they've created 13 humans at this point. They have never shown any evidence that they've done anything in the cloning realm. So remember that Elizabeth lady that had, that created all the blood lab stuff, and it was all a shell game? Is that what CloneAid is too? Is it a shell game because people see, new technology, and they want to throw their money at whoever's waving the biggest flag? I don't know. But I'm skeptical. I'm very skeptical.
Well, I think there's probably some stuff going on that we don't know about.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
At some lab off on some island somewhere where they don't,
if China's admitting to making 1 million clone cows a year,
what
are they really doing?
That's hard for me to wrap my head around, especially if like the statistics you guys have said is like the failure rate is so high. It's like that, I don't know, just feels a little hard to believe. Same thing with the company you're talking about claiming to have cloned human beings. It's like,
well, that's when you go down the rabbit hole on this topic and you're doing your research, it's one of those topics that just kind of makes you feel a little dirty and a little icky. This is not a warm, fuzzy topic. It's just kind of icky.
Mm-hmm.
And I am kind of shocked at you, Ian, that you did not bring up Star Wars because I know you love Star Wars.
I have.
No, not in this episode.
No, I haven't because this doesn't feel like the place for it. But
look at what Star Wars,
right.
Genetic cloning was banned in Star Wars. Remember the Clone Wars?
I mean, once it was banned, but like
that's what it was.
Yeah, no, the Clone Wars, yeah, that was a big thing because they thought that having human military was more efficient and better than robots. So I mean, like that's a big thing. But at that point,
I can guarantee you that there's military around the world that is working on this.
I mean, yeah, but like I just think that like I think there's bigger fish to fry than cloning. Personally, like I feel like that I think cloning human beings, I don't think is the way that we're gonna try and like reach the stars. And of course, maybe one day in the future, but like right now, I feel like there's some bigger things.
I could see clone people. You put them on a ship and let them go out there and
but then again,
take
we start
the risk.
If we want to start bringing up Star Wars and bring all that kind of stuff up, it's the same sort of thing of if we're gonna start cloning people to then treat them like lesser than people, it feels like now we're all of a sudden starting to get into like the same sort of situation with like race things that we have in our modern day of like,
it would be a second tier citizen.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like at that point, if you're cloning a human being that like has the mind and they can function as a person, and then you're going to try and like specifically have them be some sort of like quote unquote lesser tier person or slave labor.
I could see. I mean, you say you've mastered human cloning. You've created a duplicate of yourself. It's basically a blank copy. I can teach that person whatever. So if the point is to use these people for certain maybe high risk tasks, I could easily see. I'm going to train you for this,
right?
And that's what you would be.
But here's what I'm saying though, is that right now we're having a very similar conversation with AI, and all of a sudden now people, again, we are not at this point yet, and I will repeat that, we're not at this point now where AI has become sentient, but we are having the conversation of what happens when the computer looks at you and says, I don't want to do that. And it's like, oh, you have thoughts and feelings now. That is a hard thing to kind of to think about and to comprehend when we're talking about computers, because again, we're not there yet. But if you're talking about cloning a human being that lives and acts and breathes like a human being, and then all of a sudden they now have autonomy and go, actually, I don't want to go do this high risk task. How are you going to look at that person that, like, yes, is a clone, but I would feel like is a person to its core?
What if they make a person that...
If they make a person that can't think or can't process, like, complex emotions and is, like, which, again, feels a little ethically and morally wrong, then you can probably wager, like, oh, well, he's a clone. He can't think for himself. But even then, it's like...
I would think if the science would get to a point where you can generally clone a person with a brain that can think...
Right.
But they would not have any of the memories of you.
Right.
You would, in essence, have to, you would program that person that this is.
Right.
And that's all that person would know.
You're right.
Of course, we don't know how that would evolve over time. Would, eventually they learn the idea of yes and no, and I don't necessarily like that. Or, I mean, I don't know. You could, in essence, brainwash a clone into doing.
I just feel like I feel like people like myself and other people around the world would probably look at that and say that feels like a disservice to that person, even though it's a clone. I think it's still a person.
Well,
and then there would be people around the world that would be talking to them in their ear or at some. I mean, like you have to really. that clone, that brainwashed being of some sort of, you
Right.
really have to make sure they are disconnected from the world, like really disconnected. Because if they even get like a touch of a smartphone, I'm almost sure they would all of a sudden start questioning, what am I? Who am I?
I think it would be, I think the cloning, if it gets to that point, I think humans would be cloned only in certain circumstances for certain things.
Right.
And it wouldn't be like this mass cloning where you got a
Right.
bunch of clones wandering around
Right.
with everybody. I think they would be, stuck in a controlled environment doing certain things.
Right. Maybe it's just because I'm too empathetic, but I'm trying to put myself in a scenario of, let's say I can think complex thoughts like a human being, and I have to now sit here and say, I am a cloned person that is lesser than these real human beings, and I also may have a shorter lifespan because of genetic problems that I have.
Right.
It just, the more and more I think about it, the more it's like, why am I alive? Why am I here? And it's like, oh, you were bred for this one purpose, to do this one thing.
Right.
And then it's like, I'm trying to think as a human being what that would feel like, and I'm like, that feels horrifically wrong.
But that's if they're sentient.
Yeah, I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
Like I said, now you're right. This is all if they can think and have complex emotions and have feelings and thoughts like human beings do. Yes,
That movie,
right.
The Island, goes directly and addresses that perfect example of it. Really kind of brings that up because these people are like, hey, I need my organs. I need this replaced. Go harvest them.
Right.
These they have feelings. They're sitting there going. They feel pain. It's like
Well, we covered some of the alien stuff a couple of weeks ago, and people that are into the whole ancient aliens and the alien hypotheses say that alien greys are cloned. That's why they all look the same. That's why they all have that they are a biological robot essentially that are just sent off world to do these tasks that it's.
Yeah, I'm not going to risk myself, but we'll send these clones out there to go get the, take that risk. And even with the advanced tech supposedly they have, it's still a risk.
Mm-hmm. And then if you follow authors like Zachary Stickin, are we all clones? Or do we carry the genetic material from off-world? That's a whole other show, but it's been proposed.
Miranda, that would be an interesting topic,
right? But even still, even with that hypothesis, if we are clones of some other beings, or again, in my frame of reference, even if we let's say our genetic ancestors come to collect us as like some sort of like, oh, you're just clones of us, I still would feel like, I hear you, but like we are now intelligent enough, and we now have a whole society. We are now working people like.
But you might think that, but compared to their technology, we might be
you're
like
right.
the ants and the little.
You're right, but I would be hard pressed to just lay down and let some other people, like, they would have to really come and like kill me specifically, because I'm not gonna be your puppet. You may have thought that one day, but now I am on a level of intelligence now where like you're going to have to either like really brainwash me or like put some sort of trance over me to be just like, oh yeah, you're just going to like come and be our slaves now. It's like, I get that, but like, I'm not going to go down without a fight. That's what I'm saying. And I may be the first to go, and that's fine. But I just feel the same way. As if we're going to sit here and we're going to clone human beings and then be like, you are going to be our mindless labor. If they even have an inkling of like, maybe I don't want to do that. Now that's when it feels wrong.
But
to
what
me.
if they're bred not to have it? Like that's what I'm saying. There's the ethics coming.
How would you view a clone? That's what I'm saying. Would you view a clone of yourself as your equal?
I mean, like I said, if he could form complex thoughts and emotions and communicate as a human being, then yes.
What if it was just a flesh bag?
But he's not you.
You're right. You're right. I'm not saying it was me, but at that point, if it is a copy of me that can have thoughts and feelings, it is a human being. And it's hard for me to look at that person that yes is a potentially a twin of mine, may not be, he may have a shortened lifespan because of genetic problems, but it is hard for me to look at that person as something less of a person, unless you're saying like, again, there's some sort of like development thing where it's like it's hard.
What
but
if
even
they
still, then
what
it's
if
like
they tweak the gene so that it's the same body as you, but it's hydrocephaly? There's no brain in there. So
Right.
so it's just like
At that
it's
point,
just
'cause
this reservoir of
you're
organs
right.
for
if,
you.
If it is just some sort of reservoir that like acts like an ant or off of some hive mind that just doesn't have any, that just runs off of instinct. Like I love there's a cat that has been that I've been taking care of. I love the cat. Does the cat have anything besides instincts or emotions? No, I don't. I don't think it probably can form complex thoughts. Do I look at it as like lesser than? I mean, I wouldn't say that, but it's the same sort of thing. It's like at that point, if this thing is just a bag of organs, then I think I would probably frame it in that aspect of like it is still a being, and I think we still need to start talking about like taking care of this thing, especially if it has like some sort of mental inabilities or something, because like it is now a living and breathing thing. So it's like I can't just like pretend like it doesn't exist. I mean, you can, but again, we're starting to talk about some moral dilemmas here.
Well,
But you're right.
That's
But
what this is all
right.
about.
But what I'm saying is like the part that gets really hard is whenever you guys start thinking, or like if it can have motor functions and it can start to think. It's like, yes, you can brainwash it. Yes, you can make it feel like it's only one way. There are people out in the world right now that are like that are brainwashed into believing one way, or that are their whole entire lives are around a religious belief or whatever. That's what I mean. Is like at that point, it's hard for me to sit here and go like I would try my best to try and enlighten that being in some way, to be like, you like. Yes, you were bred for this one thing, but like you're a human being. You can. I don't know. Maybe I'm going off.
No,
of
I
the
mean,
weeds here,
I
but
think these are all issues that would have to be addressed. I mean,
Right.
no, it's true. I mean,
because
how do you view this
right,
other
right.
being? I
Right.
mean,
I think it gets.
I would
becomes-
view it as not my equal. I mean, I'll be
Right.
honest with you on that. If
But
they
like,
took a copy of me, he ain't me.
You're right, and at no point did I say he was you. But what I'm saying is, like, are you saying that he is, if the copy of you could still think like a human and could still operate like a human being, would you then think that that person is like lesser than you, as in like?
Well, I think it goes back
if he had-
back to yeah. I mean, I get it.
You're right. You're right.
But he ain't me.
You're right, and you're right, and I'm not
and
saying
he's not my equal. So I would view him as a lesser being.
interesting.
I would view him as a lesser being because he's not me. That's just me personally. He's not me.
That scares me a little bit.
Why?
Because now we're getting this is getting really scary now. because for me it feels like you're saying that like that
he's not a real human.
But what
I don't view it as
you're
a
right,
real
you're right,
human.
you're right. Now again,
I
like I
mean-
said, this is all hypothetical. Like he may not have a spirit or a soul that makes a person feel like a person. But for me, if this person was to walk in the door and sit down and say, I'm a genetic copy of Jason, I have lived my own life, I have my own life experiences, I have my own thoughts separate from Jason,
Right.
even though I have all the genetic makeup of Jason,
Right.
I would look at that person and say, you're still a person though. Like, yes, you're a
you
clone.
are.
You're a clone. But I wouldn't say that you're a lesser being than me. You know what I'm saying? That's where I get kind of scared about it, because I'm like, yes, it's a clone, but if it can operate like a human and it can be a human, like at that point,
Well, once again,
Yeah, right.
it comes down to then what is a human?
you're right.
And so to me,
And for me, I think a lot of it is the complex thought and like the consciousness, which I know is hard to measure. That's why I brought up the whole AI thing. Is like AI can say the right things, but whenever you break it down, there's no independent thought apart from prompts that are given by a person. You know what I'm saying? So like if this clone could have independent thoughts outside of everything else, if it was brainwashed and it says, but I still feel sadness. If it was brainwashed into thinking that like you were designed for one task, but it can still think like, I was bred to do this one thing, but I like to do this. Or I like the sound of music. I like the smell of flowers. And it's like it's able to make that.
I mean, this clone was made just like a robot. I mean,
Right.
you were,
but the difference
you
is
were created for a certain purpose.
You're right. But the difference between a robot is a robot. Again,
Even if it's a super advanced AI robot?
Well, again, that's what I'm saying. Right now, the definition of a robot is it thinks based off of parameters that you give it. That is a computer. A computer can't think on its own. It has to be
At least
given,
right now they
You're
can.
right. You're right. But what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying, it's a slippery slope. That's why I brought it up to begin with. Because like right now, AI can't think independently. But whenever it does get to that point in the future where like AI can think independently and can start to develop what it may process as emotions, then it starts to get into that scenario of like, now we have to start thinking of like some legal, like some moral obligations to like how are we going to treat this individual because now it acts and operates like an individual.
So would you consider that as some sort of being that would be given rights just because it can start thinking?
If
it's an AI?
If it is an AI and if it can get to the point where it can start to like process, if it can start to develop what we define as consciousness, I think we need to start having that discussion. Because then it starts to get to that moral quandary of like now we're starting to develop like
I think it serves human beings.
Currently, yes, but there will be a time when it doesn't, when it can think for itself and it can operate on its own, and that's like.
I mean, Ian, that
I know.
You're basically opening yourself up to basically make yourself extinct because.
That's why again, and that's why I'm very.
I mean, kind of the Planet of the Apes.
You're right.
We kind of get into that Planet of the Apes kind of backdrop.
That's why I'm so vehemently against it right now because there's a lot of problems that we as humans have to figure out right now. AI is changing and evolving and progressing really quickly. I think we still have many, many years before we're ever to the discussion of do we need to start talking about if it's thinking for itself. I don't think we're at that point yet, but that's why I feel so passionately about it, because I'm like, once we start down this path, we need to start having some really important conversations that nobody, and I mean nobody, is ready to have right now.
Well, I don't know. The issue's pretty clear to me, but I mean, I will always believe that all these things were created to serve us, not to be our equals.
You're right.
I mean, it's just not now.
And that's
maybe there's some unknown factor that comes in and changes that paradigm. But I'm go into it saying this is a clones. You were created for a specific purpose, whether it's organ harvesting or to perform highly dangerous things that I don't want to risk myself in doing. To me, it's clear. I would have no problem making that distinction because they never were created to be my equal. Now, if you're trying to create something to be your equal, I have to kind of wonder, what are you doing? Why would you even want to go down that road with that?
But I'm not saying that you're intending to create something as your equal. But what I'm saying is, what if you create something that accidentally becomes your equal? Like if you're able to create a clone of yourself and it can think and process and feel and do everything that a complex human being can, I find it hard pressed to look at that thing that you created that can function alone as a human being.
Well, it wouldn't. It would be something that looks the same as you. It would have the
You're
same.
right.
It would have the same phenotype expression.
You're right.
But it would not be you because it would not have your soul.
You guys are.
It would not
You're
have,
right. And again, I think the part that we're getting misinterpreted here, that is getting lost in translation here, is I'm not saying that I would look at that clone of myself and say that we are equals in the same fact that like you have had the same life experiences that I. But what I'm talking about as far as equal, I'm talking about equal as far as like the respect of a human being. Like yes, that he may not have the same life experience, but I'm not going to say that you are lesser of a human because I had just created you. But like if it could think and feel. Because I feel like the argument that we're having here is like if I was to, it feels an awful lot like slavery. I stumble across a society of people that is not as technologically advanced as I am, and I take advantage of them. They are still people with thoughts and feelings that can then reproduce to have more people in the future. And that's where I think I'm getting into this like quandary.
But you're surmising that we're going to create clones that are the equivalent of you.
You're right, and that's what I'm
And
saying.
I don't think. Well, technologically, we're not there yet.
That was-
and if
that was
somebody
the-
does create a clone of their child, it's going to be of a child that passes on.
You're
it's not
right.
going to be of their healthy child
You're
where
right.
they have two of them.
And
all
I
of a
never
sudden.
said it was.
No,
never said,
and I'm not.
But
I'm not pointing fingers. What I'm just saying is that you're taking the premise that
I was giving
this,
a hypothesis.
this whole thing is going to be the same. And I think that if we get to the point where we have the technology that we can make cloned organ bags or clone people, who's to say, we would also at that point have the technology to make sure that they weren't sentient or that
You're
they were
right.
missing.
You're right.
It was just like,
I think the reason why I got so heated on it is it's all just a hypothesis. If this clone was to think like a person, it would be hard for me to look at that person and say, you're just a thing for me. Because it feels.
I have no problem if we create a biological entity
Mm-hmm.
and we treat them as such, as a biological entity. They are a person, because they're going to be born with their own soul.
You're right.
They're going to be born with their own experiences. Just because you share the DNA of somebody else doesn't mean your life is going to be anything remotely the same.
You're right. And
I think that you're making a connection between AI and clones that
I'm talking.
I think that's where the discord is.
No, I really honestly think that it's. At no point, I'm not talking about a clone of myself. I'm saying like if Jason had a clone and it can think and feel and it can be a human being, I would consider it a clone of a human being, but it still can think and feel. And I would find it hard pressed for me to say like, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to decide your fate because I'm a real human being and you're like a pretend human being.
But nobody's suggesting that.
That has been the conversation we've been having recently. About I did a hypothesis of like, let's say hypothetically, you were to create a human being that can think and feel.
If I pay to make a clone of me,
right, and it can think and
he's
feel,
mine.
Right. But what I'm saying is, at that point,
he's not me, and he's not my equal.
And
he's just not.
You're right, and I have not said that. But what I'm saying is that I find it hard that you guys can sit here, and if that thing can think and feel, you now have ownership of it, and you can decide its fate for him.
Yeah.
Okay. And I feel
that doesn't. I don't.
And
it's
that's
not
called
that
parenting.
that bullshit. Bullshit.
No, what do you do to your kids? It's parenting.
No, you're right. But I'm not talking about. talking about like a parent because you can't. I mean, like yes, if you wanted to, you can decide you want to kill your child. But that's not right. That is a person. That is a person with thoughts and feelings. And yes, it is maybe a child, but what I'm talking about when it grows up, you can't make decisions for it. Because you don't own it. It is your child. Like, yes, you have the responsibility over it, and I'm thinking of it in the same aspect. You can develop.
I would venture to say you own you. If I pay to make a clone of me, I don't own it.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying
otherwise,
that.
if I didn't do that, that thing wouldn't be there.
You are right. You're not. I don't think you guys are listening. But if that clone was to have a feeling, was to have an emotion, and like, let's say you have to harvest its organs, and all of a sudden it's like, I have this human emotion of fear inside of me because you get to make the decisions for me. But I actually have these thoughts and feelings inside of me that like, actually, I don't want to die. And then you, as the quote unquote owner now, have to go, no. I bred you and I own you. And even though it has thoughts and feelings like it would, like any other human being, you still have to sit here and go, I'm going to kill you to harvest your organs because I own you. Like, does that not feel a little dirty to you? That's the hypothetical thing I'm talking about here. If it doesn't have thoughts and feelings, it would be hard for me to make that same distinction.
I don't think that there's any scientist out there that would make a whole human clone.
Right.
You're right.
Just to harvest.
You're right.
They're gonna.
You're
if they
right.
want to grow a kidney, they're going to grow a kidney.
Exactly.
If you want to grow a liver, you're going to grow a liver.
Exactly.
It's it's going to be because money is going to drive everything, and you're not going to put the time and the money and the effort into recreating entire people.
You're right,
and that's when you can just grow whatever parts that you want.
And that was why it was all just a hypothetical. If you're going to go ahead and because we had talked about it initially, we talked about you creating a clone that could do a specific dangerous task. It doesn't have to be a clone of you. It could be a clone of Joe down the road.
Right.
But regardless, if that clone of Joe all of a sudden was like, I actually kind of feel scared to do this very dangerous task that I was brainwashed into doing, it would be hard pressed for me to think of that scenario as anything but a human being that like I'm sending to its own death, and it's hard to quantify.
I mean,
but anyways,
that's what I'm saying. That we're having. That's what I'm saying. This type of stuff. This is why this topic. Once you go down that rabbit hole,
right? There's a lot of moral stuff.
There's a lot of issues that go along with it. I mean, but you know, I don't know. I guess if we ever would get to a point in some theoretical future that, I mean, the science could create an exact replica of me that I would pay for, then yeah, I mean, it's mine. I mean, it's what it is. I mean, a human being is a result of two different cells of a male and female coming together to create something new. It has nothing to do with artificially pulling the cells of one person and reproducing you asexually. I mean that's basically like bacteria.
Yeah.
I mean that's what it is. I mean that's as an interesting topic. A lot of different things going on with that, but I mean, to me, if you know, as I said, if we get to that kind of level of sophistication with the science, which will be far in the future, I mean, the idea that if I didn't pay to do this, that person wouldn't exist.
Look at the amount of celebrities and wealthy people that have paid to cryogenically freeze their body or their head or whatever. You know, they've been doing that since like the early 1960s, all under the auspices is that we're gonna be able to cure the type of cancer that they died from, or we're gonna be able to regenerate them, or whatever, you know, whether it's grow the whole body for them, if it's just their head that's frozen, or, you know, we're going to be able to resuscitate them and bring them back. But almost every single one of those cryogenic centers has had catastrophic failures. All the bodies have melted and warped, and, you know, it's like they're goo right now, and yet people were forced into paying thousands and thousands of dollars to be cryogenically preserved, and then for their annual maintenance, you know, it's like a timeshare for your body where you're paying all these maintenance fees on everything. But there is zero hope of pretty much anybody that's been cryogenically frozen to be brought back to life. Yet with this cloning type of technology, instead of freezing your body and hoping that when they bring you back, it's still your soul and your essence that's in there, theoretically, someone could go and, you know, we've got samples of George Washington. Somebody could go and clone George Washington and bring back, you know, recreate some of these characters from the past. But to what end? And, you know, why would they? I don't think it would serve any. Well, I don't think it would serve any purpose. Well, that's what I'm saying.
So what would theoretically be the driving force to create other human beings in this way? It's either going to be for labor, or it's going to be for medical. Yeah. It's going to be for the harvesting of organs. That is the only reason why
cell lines.
Oh, research, I mean, yeah. But I mean, other than that, what would be the point? Why would even the motivation exist to just create the creation of other human beings? Because see. Otherwise you can do it normally. Yeah. This the natural way.
We'll see some wealthy people that will try to clone a child that's passed on or something. You know, we know that's coming. You know, that would be an application.
Right.
But, you know, by and large, the greatest percentage of the applications for cloning isn't going to be about people specifically. It's going to be all of these other things. And, you know, but the same moral and legal questions still come into play. And you know, all the potential risks that are involved. You know, this is not an easy topic. It's, you know, it's when you start looking at it, there's so many different levels and layers, and there's so much potential money that's involved in this. You know that some people have some really nefarious plans. Like I can fully understand military wanting to create super soldiers. You know,
I can definitely see that. Yes, I'm saying. Yeah. Well, that's exactly the same. You know, what would be the motivation to clone people? It just in general, it's going to be for labor, to go out and do these, you know, go into these dangerous situations where I don't want to send regular people. Mm-hmm. or it's going to be for medical purposes. That's be the only reason to create another human being. It ain't to create another human being just to be my buddy.
No.
Because, you can do that normal. You can create that naturally. There's no reason to do that. So I don't understand why anybody won't even go down that road to create without knowing going into it that this person is only for a specific purpose. That's it. That's the only reason they exist. Otherwise, why even go there? That's how I would view it. And that's why I said, yes, they're not equal to me because they're created for this reason only. I went into this deal to be able to perform this function or to be able to grow me organs or whatever the case may be.
Or a new L5 disc.
Yeah, exactly. I need some new disc, perfect example of that. So, that's what I'm saying. Otherwise, why even go there? Because it serves no purpose.
Right. And that's why when I started all of it, it was all just a hypothetical. If it can have thoughts and feelings, would you still sit there and say, I own you and I'm going to now take what I need from you? And that's where, for me, it's hard. Because if it can have thoughts and feelings, I would feel very disgusting inside looking at that being that is functioning as a human being and say, you are lesser than me because I have created you for this thing. And at that point, it's like now you have a God complex and you're also telling this thing that can think and feel what you decide for it whenever it can think and decide for itself. Like if we're going down that hypothetical route, that's what I was meaning whenever I started the whole
I get that. I do. I understand that, but as I'm saying, if you're going to go down that route to begin with, there is some preconceived things built into those decisions. Why am I doing this? Why am I spending, all this money to create a clone of me?
Right.
Otherwise, I'm not going to bother about it, So, kind of interesting topic, man. I never thought we'd kind of get into as deep as we did. But
we just have to look at the movie Jurassic Park to kind of see
the dangers,
what the potential benefits and the potential dangers are going to be. And I think that was a movie, I know Ian likes to discuss different movies in his other podcast, but Jurassic Park and its sequels is a perfect example of, they took a cloning technology and they recreated species that are no longer on Earth to make a theme park for people to go to. And I can 100% see that that's coming in our future with a lot of these Paleolithic animals, and they're going to recreate all these kind of things because that's an easy way to market and to package up cloning with a nice little red bow on it so people buy it. Because then you're not thinking about these hard questions about souls and sentience and all this other kind of stuff. You're saying, ooh, I want to go look at the woolly mammoths. And you'll go and you'll fork out your money to go to these places and to see all these animals that haven't been seen for 20 or 30 or 40,000 years. But it's an easy way to package it up where people accept it. And once people accept that technology,
that's right,
it opens the floodgates.
Yep. That's what I'm saying. I would think by the time you get to the point where that technology is possible, there's been so much conditioning that has already happened that you're not thinking that way about it. The society has basically reached to a point where, okay, we create this basically for our entertainment. That's basically what it's for.
You're right. And that's why I brought it up to begin with, because yes, that is we need to start having those kind of conversations now about that, because again, it's the same thing with AI. There's a lot of stuff that I think that a lot of us aren't ready to talk about yet, that I really think that if we're going to keep going down this thing where, like this timeline where you really just want to keep improving AI and you want to just keep throwing money at it and you want to keep getting money out of it, we got to start really having some conversations here about what are our thoughts and feelings about that kind of stuff, about morality, about treating technology as something more than it is if it ever gets to that point, which I know we still have. Again, we're still, hear me when I say it is not there yet, and we have a very long time, I think, until we get there, but it is a lot closer than I think this discussion of morality with cloned humans. Just to throw it out there.
Well, Jason loves statistics, and I think I can close with this statistic. Cloning and mutagenesis market size will reach almost $10 billion within the next 5 to 6 years. and they predict an 18.7% growth rate every year thereafter. So this is big business.
Oh yeah, it's going to keep going.
It's going to start steamrolling.
We've already gone down that rabbit hole, and we're going to keep going down that rabbit hole. The human species will always keep pushing the boundaries of what we can do. I just think it's inevitable.
But just because we can do something doesn't mean we should.
Well, I would agree with you.
That has been the question we've asked over the handful of years.
Our what was that saying? Because it talking about Jurassic Park. What was the character who Jeff Goldblum's character?
Ian Malcolm.
He mentioned a little saying like, have we?
Yeah, we kept asking the question if we
I forget how he said it, but I thought it was very poignant what he said.
It was Dr. Ian Malcolm, and he says we kept asking the question if we could, but we never stopped to ask if we should.
Right.
So
and I think we're, the science is going to keep pushing the envelope. I just do.
And what's frightening, just from a genetic perspective, is that they have really pushed back the clock on acquiring DNA from bodies at this point in time. It used to be that the assumption was that DNA broke down very quickly and that you could not get serviceable DNA from old bones. But there are scientists right now that have taken DNA from dinosaur bones. They have taken DNA from prehistoric human bones, and they have been that has been serviceable DNA. So we might not even see them recreating modern humans. What if they bring back Neanderthals, or what if they bring back, Australopithecine? And we've got a whole bunch. We've got all this. The evolution of man at the zoo, and you can go and see all of these old forms of where we came from, or what our origins are. Are people going to equate them with the same kind of respect and beliefs?
Well, if they're in a zoo, probably not.
But you know where I'm going with this.
Right.
Like we're able to get DNA now from sources that we never thought possible even 5 years ago. So all of those sources are potentially sources for cloning. So the idea that we can create a whole bunch of different species right now is closer than it's ever been before.
Right. And on that note, wrap this
has been a good episode. I didn't really think we would, I was kind of worried about how we would find enough information to talk about, but there's a lot there.
Well, anyways, if you're looking to give us your 2 cents, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be somebody that wants to probably tell us how they feel about this, we have an email address, which is getoffendedtogether@gmail.com, and I'm pretty sure we offended somebody out there. And we also have a Facebook page /Retrospect Pod. You can basically type in Retrospect Pod anywhere and probably find the show. But anyways, until next week, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. God bless.
And Miranda 2.0 both say take care.